In my infinite and insane wisdom, I decided I needed a winch, and one became available locally at a decent price. Well, let's start with the heart of the problem. I believe this winch has 250 feet of half-inch cable on it, and it is heavy. It took 3 of us to pick it up and put it in the back of a pickup truck. So installing it by yourself is going to be a problem. Fortunately, I have a forklift. So what I did is shove the bolts in from the back side and put an O-ring around them to hold them in place. Picked this up with a forklift, shoved it on the bolts, and put the nuts on. Now, tightening the bolts is another problem. If there's no bed on the pickup or no bed on the frame, it's not too big a problem. You can get them with end wrenches, but it is difficult. The easiest way with the bed on, pardon me for just a minute, I have to grab my creeper, is to remove the muffler. Then you have to remove these brackets with the bolts and springs up on the top. Reach over the top and pull the nuts and bolts that hold this heat shield on. Then you can get to the nuts up here with a wrench and get an impact wrench on the bolts. Otherwise, it's extremely difficult. While we're under here, we'll look at the cable routing. Okay, all of the fuel tanks are notched that I know of. You have to add this roller and guide assembly here. And we'll have to go around to the other side of the tire. We have to add this roller assembly. And this cab bracket and cab mount and fairlead assembly is different, and it's quite difficult to get out of there because there's no access on the bolts. You have to use a 30mm box end wrench to get that nut out. Then once that is removed, all you have to do is raise the cab slightly and you can get it in and out of there. It's much easier if you completely remove the bumper. Now, to get the cable out of this fairlead to run in the back, you have to reach inside and pull this, I forget what you call it, hitch pin out of there. Then you can slide the roller pin out, pull the roller out, and there's enough room to feed all this through there. I added this because there's really nothing suitable to go on here, and this was laying in my junk pile. Let's go look at the back now. Now you have to add this roller assembly just above the right rear axle and add this fairlead. And it's the same kind of setup. You pull the hitch pin out of it, pull the pin out, then the roller will open up far enough to get the cable through. Now keep in mind, this bracket is different and has to be changed. It's put on with Huck bolts. And you also have to have the light pod with this hole in it. If it doesn't have this hole, you can't get the pin out. Now normally this is just a solid piece without a hole, and for whatever reason my truck, even though it wasn't equipped with a winch, had this hole in it. Now the hook fasteners are easiest removed with a cutting torch, although you can do it with a grinder if you like. And while we're talking about that, without a winch, these two bolts in here, I don't think you can see them, but the front winch mounting bolts are also huck bolts and have to be cut out. Well, let's go around to the other side. You have to add this hydraulic tank. There's also two huck bolts that have to be cut out and replaced with regular bolts. And if your battery cables aren't routed, they're hard to see, exactly like those, the tank will not fit. Mine were originally came out of here and went up through this opening. Now, this bracket is also attached with huck bolts, and as I remember, I had to cut one of the huck bolts out because it interfered with the fitment of the hydraulic pump. So there's your hydraulic tank. Seemed to me it holds 15 gallons of hydraulic fluid. Now let's talk about the PTO. The PTO is extremely difficult to get to. If there's no bed, it's not too bad. But to get it out, it will not come out the top and it will not come out the bottom unless you pull the driveline loose to make more room. I would recommend that you do not remove it or install it with the PTO switch in the end of it, or it will be broken, as I learned myself. There is no shimming required to the PTO if you use the factory gasket. And I had somehow lost one of my bolts and had to buy a bolt and shim kit. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't difficult. Got it from my local dealer. Now there is the PTO. With the body on it, or the bed on it, it took me 7 hours to replace this PTO, reinstall this PTO. I've put many a PTO on, and I've never had one this difficult in my entire life. The pump is screwed on behind it. It's not difficult, but the fittings are nearly impossible to reach. I ended up tightening the pressure line, which maybe you can see up there, with a long pry bar and a hammer. Don't laugh, it worked. The lines run down here. There's a support bracket on the top of the transfer case. Let me see if I can get the camera in there and we can actually see it. Now, I had difficulty with this because I broke my air wrench that I've been using for 15 years. So I grabbed my old snap-on wrench, stick it on that bolt, and the first thing I do is break the bolt off. And I go, well, that's odd. And I thought, well, I'll just put the bracket on the next hole up above it. I don't think we can see it. We'll try. It's up there in no man's land. So promptly broke that off. Then dumb me figured out I didn't remember how to work the air wrench, and it was going backwards. So I ended up drilling out those bolts, and I'm not a fan of easy outs, so I pounded a Torx bit in them and just unscrewed them. You could unscrew them with your fingers, so an easy out probably would have worked just fine. But that's how I did it. The lines come back, go to this T. These are the return lines here. One attaches here and one attaches here. This is the pressure line here. These two go up to the winch motor. Now, as far as the electrical stuff, we'll climb back in the cab. while I wander around. The wiring is quite simple. I'm going to have to set the phone down. I can't get in. The wiring is quite simple. There's only 3 switches. This one turns the PTO on. This one turns the winch on. This is the in and out. There's a bunch of other wiring in here that's unused for this application. The existing wire harness is in here that this plugs into. There's just 2 connectors behind the heater. I found the easiest way to get to them was to take all the bolts out of the heater and slide it back. You can see I've added other junk in here. Now, my tachometer didn't work, but when I bought this truck, the transmission had been replaced, and there's a mag pickup in the top of the flywheel housing that we'll try to look at. Of course, they hit that with the ring gear and smashed it. As I remember, it was, I want to say it was 1-inch fine thread. I got one off of eBay for like 30 bucks. Well, let's see if we can get the cab up quickly. Well, let's run through the operation while we're here. Okay, turn the winch on. The green light there comes on. That tells you the PTO is engaged. Get this switch, that turns the hydraulics on, and then this just operates the winch. Okay, now if you have the PTO engaged, you cannot engage a gear. If you engage the PTO with it already running and in gear, you can drive and use the winch, at least on this model. I hear there's other software levels that may or may not allow this. And because this is a 3116, the PTO speed is operated with the hand throttle. On later trucks with a 3126 or C7, I understand the high idle comes on and you have no control over the idle speed as soon as you engage the PTO. Let's lift the cab and I will show you the mag pickup.